Hello, and welcome to the video. Today we'll be talking about yarn and crochet hooks. As you can see, I have a lot of yarn here, a lot of different brands and styles, and we're going to go over all the different kinds that you might find in your local craft store, as well as the different sizes of hooks and the different kinds of hooks that you might find to kind of help you know what you're looking at and know what to look for. So, the kind of yarn that you will see more often than not, and is actually represented by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, technically 9 different kinds here, is something that is called, let's see, where is it on here? It's right here. It says a 4 medium. I don't know how well you can see that. It doesn't quite want to focus on it, but a 4 medium. And the 4 is the weight of the yarn, how thick the yarn is. And most yarns that you will find in a craft store will be a 4 weight. There are the really thick ones that you'll often see people use to make blankets. I don't use that kind, so I don't know what it's usually labeled as. It might be a bulky or a chunky, which I do have examples of here. So we have different kinds of what a 4 weight will look like. It's on the thinner side, and generally, you can see it says 4 here as well. Some of them, this one is also considered a 4, but seems to be a little bit thinner than others. They are all considered a 4 weight. Even this one that I showed the label of earlier, it's thicker than what you would find with this one. This one, it's a little bit thicker than this brown yarn that I have here. Don't know how well you can see that. Now, don't say it doesn't matter. It does matter. The thickness of your yarn does matter. It helps you, it tells you what kind of hook you need, and, depending on the thickness of the yarn, it will say, for example, so 4 weight, and these 2 boxes right next to it. I don't know why it won't focus. Here we go. So medium 4, and then if you were to use knitting needles, it would be 5 millimeter knitting needles. And these are some of the other identifiers that you'll find here. So US 8, and on this side you can see it says 24R, and these 2 sets of numbers in these black sides, a 4x4 inch or a 10x10 centimeter, and that's basically telling you that if you were to use the 5 millimeter needles, if you make a 4x4 or 10x10 centimeter box or square of knitting, it will be 4x4 inches. If you use that size hook. And the same for that size needle. Same for the hook, 5 millimeter hook, a US H/8, and 14R, and it's the same thing, a 4x4 inch or a 10x10 centimeter. If you use this size hook, that's a square will come out to be that size, and that goes for any yarn. It'll tell you same thing. This one's 5 millimeter hook or 5 millimeter needles, but this one actually calls for a 5.5 millimeter hook. And since I crochet, we're going to focus on the hooks on any of these labels, and all the information you need for the weight and what hook it suggests you use is going to be on the label. It should on some of these, not all of them. This one doesn't either. This one does. It tells you how many skeins per project you will need to make something of this. So for example, a 50-inch by 60-inch blanket, it says you will need 10 skeins because this is a smaller skein. If you were to make an adult size sweater, it'll take 5, a hat it'll take 2, and a scarf it'll take 2. And to give you an example, so this is a 240 yard or 3.5 ounce skein, and a skein is this shape where it's kind of ovally, and when there's the band in the middle, there's stuff on the sides, and on the end it's got a small hole that runs all the way through to the other side. So the skein, as you can actually see, this is how it's spelled right there, S-K-E-I-N, skein. So that is what this shape of yarn is called, and these are ready to use. On some of them you can even, as you can see here, it has your end prepped for you, so you could just start pulling and it'll come out, and it should not all of them. This one, as you can see, doesn't have its end prepped for you, so you will have to go in and dig around, and you might end up pulling out a bunch, but as long as it only has one strand of yarn connecting that bunch to the center, your end is somewhere in that bunch. For example, to compare, because this is a larger skein, it calls for less skeins per project as listed on here. This is a 380 yard or a 6 ounce skein, and you can see it's obviously much bigger. These are all acrylic yarns, with the exception of this mustard colored right here, and I will get onto this since it is clearly a much thicker yarn. Another shape of yarn that you may see in the store, something like this. It's very round and very flat on the top and bottom, and as opposed to the skein where the curled end is narrow here, it's the whole top and bottom. As you can see, the swirls of the way the yarn was wrapped in the factory, and you can see the swirls on this one as well. These are called cakes, like dessert cakes, because I think it's a similar shape to what a cake would be, flat on the top and bottom and very round. You would have to pull from the center here. You can actually, you don't have to pull from the center if you don't want to. You can actually pull from the outside. You just have to be aware that for the cakes, it will spin on whatever surface you have it on. I actually did a couple of projects using this this cake in particular, this pink, and then I had it in a green. And I, on several occasions, pulled from the outside, so the whole thing would spin. And it does make it easier and harder in some ways, because then it doesn't end up completely collapsing in on itself because there's nothing supporting the center. You can actually see for this one, for example, how squished it is. This one I have used this yarn. It's very squished because a lot of the center is missing, as compared to this one. It doesn't squish as much because it's still very packed. It is an unused skein. And they will always end up collapsing like this and getting really flat when you pull from the center. When you pull from the outside, that doesn't happen. It just gets smaller and smaller. But for a cake like this, it tends to spin, and if you were to pull from the outside on a skein, it tends to flop and fly all around because of the way it's wrapped. You can actually see, here's the outside strand right here, and it's this crisscross motion all the way around, and it's, I think when it's wound, it's probably on an angle like this, or maybe more like this. It's hard to say. I have never seen a skein wound before, but it's at an angle. And it's the same for the cakes as well, actually, that they're wound at an angle. If you've ever seen videos online of people hand winding with machines, but they're doing it themselves, yarn, it will turn into a cake because of the way the machine is set up. It's got that little spindle on the top that you start to have the yarn wind around, and there's like a crank that moves it, and it sits at an angle, and when it spins, it's hard to show you with just my hands. I don't personally own a yarn winder, but it does create cakes like this. And this is actually another one I have. Same, similar line, mandala. This is also a mandala, but this one's a gradient, and this one's called impressions. And you can see it's a similar shape, where you can see all the swirling of it being wound, and it's much flatter, but it's a much thicker yarn. You can see it's very thick. So compared to the majority of the yarn up here, which are a 4 weight, this is actually a 5 bulky weight, and it calls for a 9mm hook, much larger hook because of how much thicker it is. And compared to this 4 weight, you can see the difference. It's much thicker. And I don't usually work with yarn this thick. I bought it because I thought it was pretty, and I am using a 9mm hook to make something simple out of it, just a blanket, but it is going much quicker because of how much thicker it is. Comparing it to this is let's say it somewhere. Here it is. So this is actually 80% acrylic and 20% wool. I'm not crocheting with this yarn. I'm actually doing some kind of other project that involves yarn. This is Lion brand yarn. It's a very good brand. It's the same brand that this one is. It's brown, Lion brand. Heartland is its line, much like how clothes will have lines. Yarn does too. So this is their Wool Ease Thick and Quick. As you can see, it is indeed very thick, and it is a number 6 super bulky. So this one is bulky, and you can see how much thicker it is. And this Wool Ease is a super bulky. And if I were to crochet with it, it actually does suggest a 9mm as well, just like the other one. And I will agree, the 9mm is what I'm using for this rainbow yarn. I would actually have wanted to go down had I known how big the hook was for this. And that's another thing you need to look at when you are thinking about different kinds of yarn. If you want to use something thick like this, something more like the regular bulky, or one of these 4 weights, the hook size is the recommended hook size, but you can always go up or down in however much you want, and it will affect how your project looks, but it's not a hard and fast rule. You have to use whatever size hook it says on the packaging. Most yarns, or I should say most 4-weight yarns, are made up of 3 to 4 strands. So you see this one started to unravel, and it's these 4 strands that are then twisted together to make the yarn. Some brands might have 3. Most of these tend to be 4, these 4 weights. This one is special. It's probably like 8 or 9 really thin ones, all wrapped together. It's not it's twisted in a very similar way as everything else, but it gives it a very different look. These two bulky and this bulky and super bulky, you can actually see it's actually only 2 strands. See that? Twisted together. They were each twisted separately, and then they were twisted together. If you've ever seen people who make their own yarn using that loose fiber that they put on that machine to mix the colors together, and then they take the little bundles and start spinning them on a spinning wheel, a single spun strand will end up looking like this, where it's just loose fibers that were twisted together. And then They will oftentimes take multiples of these and then twist them together again to form a yarn. Hand spun yarn tends to have it either be just the first way or just two like this. It really depends on how they do it. I don't know much about spinning my own yarn. I have not endeavored to do that at all. The last type of yarn I have here, as you can see, it's in a ball. It's a very old ball of yarn for me. I've had it since probably the beginning of my crochet journey. It was actually Christmas yarn, as you can see, red and green. And what's different about it is it's the first spinning, like you saw when I unwound this one, just that fiber that was twisted once. And then they do it again, or maybe it's done at the same time, with this gold fiber, this metallic fiber. And it kind of turns into this wavy texture. It is a bit of an odd texture. I personally don't like crocheting with it because, as you can see by the end here, it gets all unraveled from the gold thread. And it's actually I learned this word more recently, a core spun yarn, which means there is something in the center to kind of help stabilize it. You see this red thread here, or brown, I can't quite tell what color that is. They initially had this and probably the gold thread, and all together with this at the center, and it was spun together. It's definitely a preference, this kind of yarn. It's very soft yarn, I will admit, but it comes unraveled as you work with it. So it's definitely something to maybe save for when you have a little bit more experience. Now, I'm not saying that any one thickness of yarn is better than the others. I just prefer 4-weight. There is more variety. As you can see, there are many brands that come in a 4-weight. We've got, the Big Twist, we've got Lion Brand, and we've got Caron, which I also like. And up here we have Red Heart. These are all brands that have many different colors and patterns that you can get in a 4-weight yarn. And a 4-weight tends to be a yarn that you will use smaller hooks. Now this is what I can get at my craft store. They are Susan Bates branded crochet hooks. And these, you can see they're much smaller, and it starts with a 4.0, 5.0, 5.5, you can see that, 6, and then 6.5 millimeter hook. For basically all of the 4-weights, a 5 or a 5.5 is the perfect size. Something that's much thinner, like this one, I actually find a 4 millimeter hook to be really good. I mean, as you can see though, it is, get that to focus. Hello, there we go. Very tiny. It is a very tiny crochet hook. But my very first crochet hook was, I believe, a 5 millimeter hook. It was not one that I had bought, it was my mom's, and I believe it was a 5 or a 5.5. And then I eventually bought a 5. I actually have 2, and you can see because they're the same brand, they're the same color, because they're both this clear plastic. I bought 1, and it was the only hook that I had for a long time. I also had I think it was a 10.5 as well. That was same thing. It was plastic. It had the same shape and all of that, but it was a white. It was just a white hook. But one of the things that is important to note about this, see the inside of the hook there? It's very flat in there. This is called an inline hook, with one word, inline hook. And this is the only kind of hook I've ever used before. That first one, that was my mom's. I think it was inline. I have lost it, so I don't quite remember. And it is all up to preference. The other kind of crochet hook you might find is called a taper hook. And unlike the inline, where it's, as you can see, let's show you a nice big one, very straight on the inside. Instead of it being completely straight in here, it actually has a gentle curve and taper on the inside, hence the name taper. This is an 11.5 hook. It's a very big hook. I would actually probably use it on this thick yarn, because you can see just how thick it is. This says 9mm, but I actually think that 9mm might be too small for that one if I were to ever crochet with it. And the sizes of your hooks, like I said, if you're going to use a 4-weight, you can absolutely do a 5 or 5.5. You can even do a 6, because I believe, yes, this yarn actually calls for a 6mm hook. And I did use the 6mm hook on this one, but I could have gotten away with a 5 or 5.5 when I made the project that had this yarn in it. But it will change the look of your pattern. If you remember my last video when I taught you how to do single crochet, I actually used this green hook that's a 6.5, and it looked perfectly fine while using a 4-weight yarn. Because even though I don't have the label for that yarn anymore, the yellow ball, it is a 4-weight yarn. You can also absolutely go up in size with a crochet hook. This pack is 8, 9, 10, and 11.5. I am currently, like I said, I'm currently using this 9mm crochet hook to crochet with this yarn, because that's what it calls for. And you can use it with any size. It will make your stitches bigger, obviously, especially with a thin yarn. It'll make it bigger, but it'll also leave more space between them, and it'll make them almost quote-unquote more holy, like it has more holes as compared to if you were to use a smaller hook with a thinner yarn like this. It is always up to you and what the project you are doing, what you want to use. However, if you are making amigurumi, quote-unquote stuffed animals, the hook size will change the size of your project, because you will be following patterns with those. So whether it's the hook size or the yarn size, it will change your pattern. So amigurumis are those cute little plushies that you probably see all over the place. I think that there are kits called Woolly or something like that, that it teaches you how to make them. And the hook size and yarn thickness really do change the project. So using a 4-weight, which is generally what you use, to make the cute little ones with a 5 or a 5.5, whatever it calls for, that is the size yarn and hook that you should use if you want it to turn out like the small version that it is showing you. If you want it to be, much bigger than what the pattern is saying, you will want to go up in hook size and yarn size. Because like I just said, if you stick with a 4-weight but use a bigger hook size, it'll have more holes. And if there's holes in the yarn when you're making amigurumi, you will be able to see the stuffing on the inside. That's why you want to also up your yarn size. So those blanket yarns that you might see in the craft store, the ones that are not spun like all of these, the ones that are like, I don't know how to describe it. I don't quite know how they're made because I don't use them, but they're really fuzzy and they're pretty soft, and you'll usually see them for plushies and blankets, but it's a very thick yarn, probably as thick as this or even thicker. You want to use a big hook and a thick yarn if you want to make an amigurumi that is larger than what the pattern calls for. As for any other kind of pattern, not amigurumi, if you're following any kind of pattern, it's the same thing. Yarn and hook size will change how things fit. Like if you're following any kind of clothing crochet patterns, wearables, hats, scarves. Scarves aren't as bad, but hats, sweaters, anything that you will wear on your body, the hook size and the yarn size will drastically change how things fit. Different brands of yarn have different pros and cons. I would probably say my favorite brand of yarn of all time is Big Twist. I have these two here. These are both Big Twist. This is unfortunately a Joann's branded yarn. Joann's Craft Stores. This is their store brand, Big Twist, for yarn. I really like Big Twist. It comes in a lot of cool colors and patterns, as you can see. I think it's very soft, both when it's wrapped in its skein and also after the crocheting has been done, because some brands of yarn, they'll feel soft like this, but then once you start to work with it and you're doing your crochet stitches, it just suddenly is rough and is not as soft as when it was like this. I say unfortunately because as of today, the 27th of January 2025, the fate of Joann's is up in the air. I will not be getting into all of that. I'm just talking about my favorite brands of yarn. So, if it is much more in the future than it is right now, and Joann's is still around, Big Twist is a really good brand. And as you can see, it comes in some really great colors. Unfortunately, this party line, I think they discontinued most of these. This one, and I have another one, they've both been discontinued, which is really unfortunate because it's beautiful yarn. But all of their, standard solid colors, and they also have different color. It's not a gradient. It's like this green one and this one where it's got multiple colors in it, and this one where it's, the different colors. It's not gradient like this one. Since I have it in my hand, I will next talk about Lion Brand. Lion Brand I also really like. I think it comes in, as you can see, it comes in some really great variations. I've got Heartland, which the Heartland line, it is solid colors, but they have slight variegation in it. As you can see, there's a little bit of light brown as well as dark brown in here. The Mandela cakes come in gradients and an ombre, where it will shift from different colors, not similar colors, where it's gradient. Like this is a gradient where they're all pink, but it goes from a light pink to a dark pink. Their ombres will have different colors and it'll flow from one to the next. This is, as you can see, Impressions. I have not looked into the different versions of Impressions that you can find. This one is Wildflower. It definitely looks like Wildflower. And every yarn has a name by the barcode. Hot Pink. This one is Orange Bright. Daybreak. This is actually called Butterscotch. I thought it was called Mustard. That's another thing you want to look into if you want to know the name of the yarn. There will also be a dye lot number, DYE, as in to dye the color, to help you know if you're buying multiples for a big project. You want the dye lots to be similar so that there's no color variation between skeins. And it'll be very noticeable too. If you have, if it's, say you're buying solid color orange, you want to make sure the dye lot is the same for every one so that this orange isn't slightly lighter or darker than the other skein of orange. Even though it's both orange bright, it might be slightly different. That's just something you want to take note of. But back onto Lion Brand. As I was saying, I think it's a very good brand. They're very soft. The woolies, I will say, not as soft because it has real wool mixed into it. I'm not saying it's rough. It's definitely not rough on the hands, but I personally wouldn't want to wear something like this. If you are somebody who would rather work with natural fibers, I've heard good thing about cotton yarns. Wool yarns, obviously, for the longest time was the staple back in the day when wool was your only form of fiber. So it would definitely be very warm. Cotton, I've heard, and linen yarns are more breathable, so they're good for the summer and the spring. Acrylic is also very warm, good for the winter. But I think Lion Brand is a very good brand. As you can see, it has a bunch of different variations, plenty of options. Caron, which are this big 1 pound skein under here. It's been partially used, so it is deflated, but it's still got a lot of yarn. It's a full 16 ounces. And then we've got the Jumbo, which is 12. This one's really dense. Caron will wind their yarn really dense. They really wind it dense. This one, the longest time as I used it, didn't even feel like I was taking anything from it. And Caron usually is pretty good about prepping their yarn, having an end. Not on the 1 pounds. I've had to gut this one. And like I said earlier, to gut is to have to dig around inside and pull it out, and you end up pulling a chunk out. It's like gutting it. But they're this size, they're jumbos, tend to be good and will have a prepped end. The Big Twist Value yarn tends to have a good prepped end for you to pull from. As you can see, this is a really cool color. This is called Foliage. It's got blue, dark green, medium green, and like a limeish green. Also, it's got really good solid colors. As you can see, it's really pretty pink here. It also comes in these Simply Soft. This is an old skein, I will tell you that. You can tell just from the label of how much older it looks. So will it say when it was made? Probably not. Simply Soft is extremely soft. It's almost silky, but you can still feel the fuzziness that many acrylic yarns have. You can also see it's a much smaller skein. Good for practice if you just want to get a handle on the crocheting and learning how to do stitches without wasting a lot of yarn. This one's called Rainbow Bright, but I don't know if they still make this one. They might. I think I've seen it in stores recently, but it is only 4 ounces, so it's really small, and I think a nice good size for if you just want to work on practicing your stitches, because you don't want to buy a big 1 pound and then have all this yarn that you're trying to wield while practicing just your stitches. This is definitely good if you plan on a 1 pound skein because you're going to be doing something big. This one doesn't have how much yarn they suggest for each project like the Big Twist labels do. The last brand I want to talk about is Red Heart. Red Heart has a lot of different colors. There's solids, there's multicolors like this. There's a big variety. I personally am a little on the fence with Red Heart. They are, I believe, a cheaper yarn than some other brands. Lion Brand, Caron, they're probably a little bit more expensive than Red Heart. Red Heart, I hear about a lot, and people think it's really good. I think when you crochet with it, it becomes too rough. This yarn in particular, I bought a lot of for a project that I've been slowly working on for the last year, and it feels soft here. It's not as soft as some of these other ones, but in the skein like this, I think it feels pretty soft. But then I started crocheting with it and it's really rough, and I'm gonna have to try and soften that somehow. I think I'm gonna try and wash it with a little bit of fabric softener to help soften up the fibers. I am using a 5mm hook for this project, so maybe if you use a bigger hook, it won't be as tight and therefore it won't be as rough feeling. But Red Heart, I will say, is also a good yarn to start with. This is a 5-ounce, only an ounce bigger than this one. So they're nice, good size for practicing. And Super Saver, I don't know if they mean that by price or what. I always took that they meant the Super Saver is a cheaper yarn. And I think you can feel it in the quality that it is a cheaper yarn. But especially if you want to save money and, you know, just buy one of the cheapest, one of a cheaper yarn, and it will definitely be, you won't be, you know, shelling out a bunch of money just to practice. Which, again, if you do like Red Heart, definitely use it. I feel it doesn't untwist as much. Maybe it does. It's been a while since I've worked with this yarn. In my last video, I talked about how sometimes the yarn likes to untwist as you're working with it. I found that with pretty much every yarn. This one in particular really likes to untwist, but you know, as long as you keep an eye on what you're doing, and make sure you always have your hook always go through every strand of the whole, you know, yarn as you do your stitches, you should be fine. So that's, I think, everything I wanted to cover when it comes to yarn and crochet hooks. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. Like and subscribe if you want to see more about yarn and how to crochet. I may even, you know, film about other forms of craft. Yarn, crocheting is really what I've been focusing on lately. But if you've seen some of my other videos, compilations from TikTok, I have done other crafts and may do other crafts again. It just depends on what, you know, is tickling my fancy, if you will. But yes, please subscribe, like, comment, share. You know, if you want to see more of this, or you know somebody in your life who is getting into crochet and needs a little bit of extra help, which is perfectly fine. Yeah, please share with anybody if you want. And thank you so much for watching.